Okay, so welcome, Baroness Tanni Grey-Thompson. It's a pleasure to meet you. Amazing career, 16 years. Started at 17 for British wheelchair racing squad and 16 medals. I mean, that's an awesome tally. You, as I say, you're one of the Britain's greatest Paralympic athletes. I mean, how did you get into that?
So when I was young, my parents just thought being physically active was really important. And it wasn't about a Paralympic pathway because nobody really knew about the Paralympics at that point. It was about being fit and strong and learning to live in an inaccessible world because there were no drop curbs and no accessible toilets. And so I just played loads of different sports as a kid. And then I'd gone to mainstream school because I could walk when I was very little, but then got paralysed. So I've got spina bifida. So my spine collapsed and my own vertebra severed my spinal cord. And then there was a really big fight to try and get me into mainstream school because back then, disabled children didn't have any right to be in mainstream education. So my parents got me into mainstream, and there was one school in South Glamorgan at the time that was allowed to take wheelchair users. So I went there, and on the same site, there was a school for deaf children, and there was a school for children with physical impairments. So I kind of did a bit of sport. So I did actually inclusive PE before anyone called it inclusive PE. I just turned up. We were amazing. I went to a comprehensive and we had a swimming pool, which is unheard of. And, the PE teacher, Mrs. Cogbill, just said, "Can you swim?" I was like, "Yeah, sure." "Well, why aren't you swimming?" And that was it. And I kind of started doing wheelchair racing at 12. And really from then on, it was just, that's what I loved doing. It was just brilliant. Really enjoyed it. And then it's a case of just doing loads of training. I mean, there's no sort of shortcut to any of this. We trained, when I was training full time, we were training 12 to 15 times a week, 50 weeks of the year. Right. And that's it really. Most of the training is quite dull and boring, to be honest.
I mean, thinking about your career and what motivates you, and obviously I read some of your tweets yesterday on Father's Day, and you call your dad Pops, and obviously that background of that family support. I mean, was it from your parents that you were really inspired, or was there anybody else in your career that has really motivated you to push even further?
My parents were sort of the start of it. I called my dad Pops because he hated it. So, it was like, so he told me he hated it. And that's what I called him, from then on in. So, yeah, I mean, they were amazing. They were really strong and, they dealt with a lot of discrimination. But there's just been so many people along the way. You never quite get to say thank you to everybody that helps you because you don't even always know the people that have helped you. So from my very first coach, a guy called Roy Anthony, through like university where, some of that wasn't terribly inclusive, but it toughened me up. So, Chris Hallam, watching him do the London Marathon in the 80s, and I was like, right, okay, I want to do the London Marathon one day. So there's just loads and loads of people that have impacted my career. And the sad thing is you rarely get to say thank you to them because, it just doesn't kind of quite happen like that. And there'll be loads of people who impacted my career that I have no idea that they did that. So, it's just there's a lot of luck with the sports career as much as anything.
I mean, it's you say you've been very fortunate, but you've worked really hard to get where you are. I mean, you made a Dame in 2005 for services to sport. Became a Baroness in 2010, Baroness of Eaglescliffe in the county of Durham. Thinking about all the things and all the accolades, what really stands out, or is there more than one?
Yeah, I mean, I always knew, when I got selected for Seoul in '88, I was 19 and I was probably one of the last on the list to be selected. And I always knew that I wanted to do the next 4 years. And actually in Athens, I knew that my career was just about done. And I competed for another sort of just about 2 years, just to be absolutely sure that it was done. But I think also it's about having a balance. So, when I was competing, I didn't work the whole time, but, there were periods where I worked because you needed money to compete, this is pre-lottery and, I was lucky I had some sponsors, but that helped me get from year to year, but it didn't, set me up for a year after retirement, let alone for life. So, I was always really conscious that you've got to think about life outside elite sport as well. and whether it's education or reading newspapers, or if you get successful, you get invited to loads of really fun and interesting dinners, but you've got to be able to talk more than well, last Friday I did 6x200 and I went to the gym, because that's a bit dull. So and that came from my parents as well. So I think I started actively planning my retirement years before I actually stopped, because I didn't want competing in sport to be the best thing that ever happened to me. You want it to be like, a lot of amazing memories. But also it wasn't just the training, it was building the chairs. It was, working on your aerodynamics, getting your sports science testing right. It was a whole combination of things that eating the right food, trying to get enough sleep, what wasn't perfect at that all the time. But, for me, it was a choice about what you want to do. And for me, I just always wanted to be good at sport.
Thinking about inclusion and thinking about young people today, and you talk about how you motivate yourself and the sacrifices you probably had to go through to get where you are. What would you say to young people and who are interested in following their dreams and following their careers, and how would you support them, and how would you inspire them?
I mean, I think it's important to recognise, the Paralympics is not for every single person with an impairment, because not every impairment fits into the classification. So I think first and foremost, you have to find something you love doing. What I would say to youngsters is carry on playing different sports for a bit long. Don't concentrate too early, because you're going to have ups and downs. And if I look at the whole of my career from the beginning to the end, I started at 12 and I finished at 37. So you have to love it, because you have to love it when you're finding it really difficult. And then it's finding good people around. It's finding critical friends. It's finding good coaches, people that you want to work with, and just working hard. I mean, in the whole of my career, there's very few sessions that I missed. There's sessions that I changed, definitely, but you've got to work hard. And I saw some really talented athletes who didn't make the games because they either didn't understand what they had to do to get selected, or the deadlines, or I remember having a phone call before one games for selection, where an athlete rang me the day after the team was selected and said, I made the qualifying time today. And so the selection date was yesterday. And although I told them loads and loads of times the date of selection, it just hadn't stuck. So you've got to know the rules and, understand how all that works as well. So, it is a big commitment, really. But if you want to do it, then yeah, you just have to work hard at it. And the reality is, I mean, it's really tough, but so many athletes don't get to make it. The first sport I played properly was basketball, and I'd have loved to have been able to play that for GB. I was rubbish. I couldn't throw, catch, or shoot. So so you also have to be realistic. You've got to love it, but you've also got to have some talent, and then you've got to work with that talent.
Absolutely. If it's okay with you, Tanni, I'm going to open the floor now. So we're going to start with Mark, if that's okay. So, Mark, over to you.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Tanni. Well, Tanni, I was just going to ask around the situation that we're in now. How do you think that's going to impact on disabled people participating in sport and physical activity?
I think with the pandemic, it's really difficult because, the guidance on shielding hasn't always been very clear who's meant to shield, how long they're meant to. I know a lot of disabled people, even when the guidance is going to be, we can go out and move around a bit more, that they're not going to. And the reality is disabled people get a bit lost anyway in the system, So, last week there were some really horrific statistics that came out about how disabled people have been affected, much, likely not to survive, how disabled women have been affected. And it doesn't always get a lot of news coverage. So I think disabled people are just going to be protecting themselves. So what we're going through right now, on top of some of the challenges for disabled people to be active anyway, are really difficult. But it's really important disabled people are active, as much as they can be. So I think, it's hard to know when we're really going to come out of this, but we've got to make sure disabled people are absolutely not forgotten. Otherwise, we're going to be limiting their life chances. So it's a really tough time for a lot of disabled people right now.
Yeah. So we've almost got to amplify the response
Yeah, absolutely. You're totally right. And make sure that disabled people, know what opportunities are there. I mean, we've been talking about how hard it is for disabled people to do physical activity and sport forever, and it felt like there was stuff happening that it was getting better. But this has changed lots of people's lives, and I think it's got to come through inclusive PE and physical activity in schools. It's got to come from clubs. Some disabled people would rather be in segregated clubs, not inclusive, but it's got to come from everywhere. And I still, before this happened, I still heard way too much of disabled people trying to play sport and the club saying, well, we don't deal with people like you. And I just don't think that's good enough anymore. You can't, you can't hide from it. There are coaching courses. There are, it's a really easy excuse to exclude disabled. And the reality is, if disabled people complained every time they experience discrimination, they spend a lot of time complaining. So I think a lot of people get to the point where they just go, okay, right, and go and find somewhere. But, if that's the attitude in the sport or the club, if you complain, you're not going to probably find a different answer. So I'm getting a bit more radical in that. I think disabled people need to complain more, but it's really emotionally tiring to do that. Yeah. And I absolutely understand why people don't want to. But, it's just that there should be no excuse. With how successful we are on a, international stage, there should be no excuse for disabled people of any impairment not being able to do some sort of physical activity. I'm a bit bored of making excuses for clubs and sports that don't want to include anymore. I think they just need to be sorted.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Mark, you okay?
Yeah,
I'm going to pass on to Hannah. Hannah.
Oh, yeah. I'll mute myself first. So, Tanni, great to meet you, and thanks for giving up your time today. I'm curious. I mean, you've won a lot of gold medals, and all of those obviously take a lot of hard work and determination. But is there one of those gold medals from the Paralympic Games that really stands out above the rest?
Yeah, it would be my 100 metres from Athens, which was my 10th. And it was my weakest event. I wasn't particularly expected to win it. I'd had to fight quite hard to get selected for that event. There were some of the coaches in the team that wanted me to concentrate on the 4 and the 800. My 200 as a T53 athlete wasn't on the programme at Athens, so I had to race up a class for that. So I kind of, was like, no, I really, really want to do the 100. This is going to be my last games. If I qualify, I'd like to do 4 events. And my 800, which was my strongest event, which was my first final of the games, I messed up really badly. I made a split-second decision, which was the wrong one, which sometimes works out and sometimes doesn't. And, I read the race wrong and put myself behind the slowest woman in the race. And 800 metres, you can't really make a mistake like that. So I remember coming off the track and I'd come 7th, and one of my team managers could barely speak to me because his job was based on gold medals. He just didn't know what to say to me. And, I think you win or you lose, you do the interview off the track. And, the hard bit was, if you do well at the games, you might get a couple of your mates going, that's all right. You don't get, a lot in the village, it can be quite laid back. But because I've been around in sport a really long time and knew a lot of people from other sports, sort of word had got back to a few of them. And I had, some of the guys from the men's basketball team who I'd probably known for 25 years coming up and giving me a hug going, you're right. You go, I don't want to. And people being nice is really hard. I just would have preferred if everyone ignored me. But people being really kind, and you don't want to say to people, like, leave me alone. So that was really hard in the village. People just saying, are you all right? Which sounds a bit daft. But so I came back and won the 100. And so for me, that's a huge relief. I still remember almost every single push of the race. I remember feeling so sick on the warm-up track, thinking, what was I doing? Why did I think this was a good idea to do the 100? And I had a really poor start, but, I came through at about 80 metres. And so, it was, for me, that was just probably the best and worst in the same games, and probably technically one of the best races that I've ever done. So that was a really nice one to have.
Wow, it's quite a story. And just following on from that, was there any moment at any time during your career where you thought you couldn't do it, or somebody thought you couldn't do it? And if so, how did you manage to overcome those thoughts and feelings?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone thought I was talented for the first 5 years I competed in wheelchair racing, because, you know, I wasn't winning races. I didn't kind of sort of come out and, you know, I wasn't immediately really good. I was all right, but I think it was only in my last year as a junior where I won the national title that people sort of looked at me and went, oh, well. And even then, there's lots of people through your career, and that's why you've got to love what you do, and train hard and be confident. Because I think also I say to young people is, you know, you might not get selected, or, you know, it's usually someone else choosing when your career ends. So you've got to be doing it for the right reasons. Yeah, I always wanted to be selected for GB, but you've also got to do it because you love doing it and you want to be the best you can be. And those two things sort of need to fit together. So I do remember when I was pregnant, when I had my daughter, quite a few people said to me, you can't be a mum and an athlete, and it'll make you soft. And I did say to one of the coaches, tell you what, let me stuff a bowling ball inside you, slash it out with a knife and see if you're training 2 weeks later. No, sorry, that was a bit sarcastic. But it's the way of going, oh, it'll change you. Oh, you know. And I mean, my daughter just travelled the world with us. I mean, she went on her first plane at 2.5 weeks old. You know, she was more used to catching a plane at the age of 6 than she was catching a bus. And it's funny, you know, we live a long way outside London, and, you know, when she was little, we'd go to lunch, we'd like, can we go on a bus? You know, and actually, if I'm honest, at that age, she didn't understand. It took her a few years to understand, mostly because I tell her a lot, how privileged, you know, she was to travel as much as she did. And she does absolutely get it now. You know, I think at the age of sort of 10, she thought every kid went to the Paralympics, because she'd been to 3 by the age of 10. You know, so yeah, there was a lot of issues around when I was pregnant, and, you know, it's almost sometimes people kind of want to knock you. So that's why you need really good coaches and training partners and people around you that can talk you through it, kind of protect you a bit. You know, say to you, okay, come on, you know, toughen up a bit, or actually, yeah, you know, you're right, that they're being negative, but you the balance is what you need. And I was really lucky. I had lots of people around like that in my career that just helped me through that. After Atlanta, which was my 3rd Paralympics, so I won a gold and 3 silvers there. Actually, a member of the team said to me, right, you're washed up now, so you might as well retire. I'm like, well, I'm not really ready to stop. And he's like, yeah, we've had a chat. We decided you're not going to be, you know, any good anymore, so you might as well stop. And we've printed your press release to announce your retirement. And I was like, well, I couldn't control in 3 out of 4 races. Somebody went quicker than me. Actually, I've broken personal bests. Fastest I'd ever raced in my career at that point. It's just in someone had gone quicker. And I remember saying to this person, well, I'm not ready to retire. And they said, well, we've printed the press releases. Well, that's a good reason to retire, isn't it? So also, you know, it's not make major decisions in moments that are really emotional is important as well. So, you know, I'm really glad, for lots of reasons, I didn't retire, that I wasn't pushed into retirement. You know, I competed in another 2 games and won another 6 golds. So, you know, it's sometimes easy to listen to people who tell you you're no good, and you need good people around you to support you through that, to say, no, actually, I do have something to offer. And if I hadn't have competed for GB again, that's sort of, you know, different. It would have been because I wasn't good enough to compete for GB again. But yeah, it's don't make big emotional decisions at those times. You need space away from it to be able to put everything into context, to think about what you want to do.
That sure showed him, though, didn't it, that you went on and won some more golds?
Yeah, and I think, you know, I think it made me angry at the time that there were athletes that maybe would have believed that, who maybe would have gone, oh, okay, right, you know, where actually, you know, I don't think people always mean to be mean. I think just sometimes stuff comes across in a way that's not positive, you know, and actually that's part of learning to deal with as an athlete, is learning to deal with people who, you know, sort of doubt you. I mean, I've lost loads of races in my career, and, you know, there are people who really delightfully come up and go, that was rubbish. Yeah, I know, I was there. Yeah, thanks. So, you know, you've got to learn to deal with this. People want you to win or they want you to lose. You know, not everyone wants you to win, and not everyone on the GB team wants you to win. You know, so you've got to learn to deal with this. I have to say, I'm very lucky that I had loads of support on the team. But you know, you've got to learn to deal with those ups and downs. That I think that's what helps build your resilience and makes you come back when times are hard. Is if you've got that resilience.
I couldn't agree more. Well, thank you very much for answering my questions. I'll hand back over to Andy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Tanni. Right, over to you, Irene. You all right?
Hi, Tanni. Pleasure to interview you. You've said earlier on in this interview that you didn't want your whole life to be defined just by your sporting career. So I'm going to try and move on to the latest aspect of your career, if that's all right. But before I do that, I'm a proud Welshman as well. My family are from Swansea. So I just wondered if you had a view on how different it was to represent Wales and Great Britain and how that differed.
It is different. I mean, I only got to really compete for Wales twice in my senior international career at Commonwealth Games, and it was amazing. It's, you know, it's a very different team. So, you know, we had younger athletes who were aspiring to be GB. We probably had athletes who are, you know, actually probably my last Commonwealth Games, I was sort of getting a bit old, you know. And it is, I mean, they talk about the Commonwealths being the friendly games, and it really is. It's a really warm sort of bonding sort of team to be part of. And because actually you know, you've got each of the home countries, you know, you suddenly realise that such, you know, this athlete's from the Isle of Man, or they're from Guernsey, or, you know, they're from a different part of, you know, which never normally gets. So you actually have an awful lot of British athletes who are at Commonwealth Games. You know, there's quite a lot of friendly rivalry between the home countries, which it's always been, you know, I'd say friendly. But I would have loved to have had the chance to compete more for Wales, but it just didn't happen. You know, there's not actually that many times that anyone can do that. But I was very lucky. I got to carry the flag at the opening ceremony of the Commonwealth Games, and having, I don't know, several hundred Welsh athletes behind singing Calon Lan as you're sort of waiting to go into the stadium or the national anthem. I mean, that was probably, you know, some of the most emotional times of my life as an athlete. It was wonderful to have the chance to do that.
Fantastic. Okay, so moving on to your sort of views now as a crossbench peer. We've done a number of these interviews, and it's evident that times have changed for disabled people within schools since your days. You mentioned yesterday Mr. Helmore and Mrs. Cockrell supporting you in your early career, or at least allowing you to do some sport. It's also a question for Mark as well, if he wants to come in afterwards, is how have times changed for disabled SEND pupils since your school days? Andy and I have been looking at the Joseph Rowntree report back from 2006 on playtime and inclusive play. That identified a lot of physical, social and organisational barriers. Have times really changed since your days in school, and where do we need to go?
I think they have changed, but there's still a really long way to go. So I still deal with education cases where parents are struggling to get their children into, you know, mainstream, genuinely inclusive education. So I think it's one of those things that, you know, it sort of gets redefined. You know, I sort of went to mainstream school before statements, you know, and then they're in and out, and education policy changes quite regularly. I think what's hard is if you're a parent of a disabled child, you have to be an expert in medical care, in, you know, equipment provision, in education. You need to be an expert in everything, and that just gets really difficult to do. And you can't assume every local authority, you know, wants to do the right thing or the thing that they're meant to be legally doing. So I see some amazing examples of inclusion, but then I see some examples where, you know, I sadly, I still get letters from parents saying their child is not allowed to do PE in school. And they've got an impairment that would not make it difficult in any way, shape or form to include them. And they're not. So, yeah, it's just, I think we all have to keep sort of fighting. And we're not going to get sort of a, you know, we love the British public love supporting and watching the Paralympics, but we're not going to keep getting a pathway coming through unless we actually ensure that all disabled people get access to PE and physical activity in schools. I mean, it's also, we know, for just general health and, you know, long-term, you know, fitness, that's really important. So if children are excluded at the younger stages, they're not going to have the chance to live the healthiest life they can. So, you know, if I could wave a magic wand, I'd put trained PE teachers in primary school that do, you know, and a lot of places, that universities that do, you know, the PE teachers courses don't do much in inclusion. So, you know, it wouldn't be hard to change some of these things, but there's got to be the will to do it. And it never quite gets to the top of the priority list. That's what the problem is. With all disability issues, they might make it into the top 5, but they don't get to be the top 1 or 2. And I just think a lot of disabled people are, it's a bit of a disservice to them, to be honest.
Thank you, and we'll do whatever we can to really put that at the forefront of sport in Birmingham, particularly up to the Commonwealth Games that are obviously coming. Moving on from that, and there's a lot of priorities on the government's list at the moment, but one of them within schools, and I've heard you ask for clarity on future spending over the sports premium. So we're all hoping that will come in again in September. I was just wondering, presuming that we do get that from September, how can schools maximise the use of the sports premium for inclusion? And also, how can para-sport organisations and families of disabled pupils really make sure that schools are using that money as well?
I think the money's vital, and, you know, we're keeping our fingers crossed at the moment. I mean, I think, again, I see really, really good schools, and then I see schools that, if you, maybe as a head teacher, if you don't have much positive personal experience of PE yourself, it's hard to do. And, you know, you're dependent on the teachers in the school as well. So there's lots of different organisations, I think, that can help and advise and support and make things happen. I think for me, it's got to be around ensuring that all the pupils, you know, have a positive experience as much as possible. Because, you know, the reality is some children will hate PE. You know, I know it's really hard, you know, but if you don't have a positive experience, you're not going to have a chance to enjoy it. So it's got to be looking at sort of everyone in the year and understand it's healthy mind, body, spirit. You know, I did some work in Wales where I was trying very hard to make sure that physical literacy had the same status as literacy and numeracy, because the three all link together. And if we always just see PE as like an add-on or something we've got to do, or, you know, got to force into the curriculum, then it's not great. But, you know, there's going to be a group of children, by the time they go back in September, if schools are properly open, then they'll have missed 23 weeks. And 23 weeks of education, physical activity. You know, Marcus Rashford's campaign for summer meal vouchers has been really smart. But there'll be a lot of children who'll be undernourished. There'll be a lot of adults at the moment because of the pandemic who've lost work and, you know, will be really struggling to eat properly. But, you know, when you add all those things together, there's almost going to be a potential to be a lost generation of young people. So I think now's probably a time where they're going to have to be re-looking at the curriculum for the pupils who are doing GCSEs and A-levels next year. So my daughter had her A-levels cancelled, but, you know, wasn't great, but, you know, I think she'll be okay. The ones that are sitting in their exams next year, I think they're going to have to look at everything in a completely different way. This might be the biggest change to the national curriculum that we've ever seen. And it'd be a shame if we don't use this as an opportunity to do things and to do physical activity in a different way. The worry is we'll just continue on, and, you know, PE just doesn't get... What happens is that the sporty kids get praised and lauded, and it's all in terms of sport and elite sport, not necessarily physical activity. And I think, might be rich me saying this because I was an athlete, but I think we've got to look at physical activity as well as sport. You've got to cater for everybody to have a long and healthy sort of rest of their lives.
Thanks very much. I know within Birmingham, we're, along with AFP and Youth Sport Trust, we're looking at a recovery curriculum for physical and emotional health and well-being. So it's great to hear you support that standpoint. I just wondered if Mark had any views on either of those, the sport premium or how times have changed.
Unmute myself. I'd echo a lot of what Tanni has said. Especially around physical activity and sport. I think there's a spectrum there that we need to remember, that it's not one or the other, and include everybody. And also the sport premium, I think, is critical. In terms of how things have evolved, I mean, I'm not disabled myself, but I've been involved for 30 years in different ways. And I think, a bit like Tanni said, some things have moved on and improved, but sometimes I get frightened I speak to a parent, I'm coaching a parent of a wheelchair player, and they're fighting for him to remain in mainstream education. And you're going, really? You know, that we're in 2000, that would have been in 2019, and they're fighting for him to be in mainstream ed, let alone in PE. They want him in the school. And I used to coach, Tanni will know, I used to coach Giant Mystery, who was, he went through special education, went on to have a great career and still has, working for the Activity Alliance. And he would now be in mainstream ed. So I think things have moved on, but it seems to be very reliant, as Tanni says, on a particular head teacher, a particular, whether it's PE or inclusion, and how we embed that in everything. It's isolated rather than, and through some of the work that I do, come across some brilliant practice. And I went to a school just before lockdown, allegedly to advise a PE teacher on profound and multiple learning disabilities, and I walked away thinking, well, I'm not sure who's learnt more today, him or me, because it was brilliant. We really worked hard to include everyone. So there is some good stuff going on, but and without going on too long, I'm a bit like Tanni said, I'm a little bit worried about the COVID situation now, and where disabled people sit in the priority list of sports recovering. And this is public knowledge. Look at the US Open decision around not including wheelchair tennis. Now that's at the very highest level, but I sense that's permeating all the way through a lot of things that are happening at every level. So my style is not to be too vocal, but I feel at the moment, I've sent emails over the last few weeks that I probably wouldn't normally have sent, because I'm quite worried that disabled people are not being considered in the recovery.
I think, sorry to jump back in, but Mark, you're absolutely spot on, because if you look at the decisions, you know, men's football getting the Premier League sorted, well, women's football sort of being left after that. And then, you know, I always look at tennis and think what amazing, how far it's come in terms of inclusion, you know, and having wheelchair tennis at major tournaments. And then that with the US Open, when I read it, it was like, oh, it just seems like easy to discount after all those years of fighting. If it's okay for the mainstream players, it should be okay for, you know, the wheelchair users. And yeah, it's like, it's almost like the fight has to start again.
Yeah.
Because I don't know the guys that organised the US Open, but you know, where other areas I've seen it, disabilities, you know, is some of the first to go, and then you've got to start again to build it back up. And you know, it's a shame, because you know, tennis is a really amazing sport to watch, and having been, you know, around Wimbledon and sort of, you know, watching the wheelchair tennis and listening to people who've never seen it in real life before, just the crowds that come and watch, you know, they really value it because they just see it as tennis. And, you know, that's the danger, that we sort of slip down the priority list again.
Okay, thank you. Well, rest assured, within Birmingham, with Andy's great work, we've got kids all across Birmingham doing the superhero try already. And I just looked down at my phone and had a text to say they're uploading their data to Strava and how many kilometres they're doing. So we're doing our best. We're doing our best. Andy, have I got time for two less formal questions?
Of course, yes, of course.
Yeah, so just going back to Tanni, just for a little bit of fun, which do you prefer, the Gower coast or south of France?
Oh, I like warm weather. I like really, really, really warm. So I actually have a massive problem with temperature control, so I don't put a t-shirt on until it gets to 30. But I'm Welsh. I'm going to say Gower, but with south of France weather. Oh, that's such a
unlikely.
rigged out answer.
Okay, and just one more. Gareth Edwards or Gareth Bale?
Oh, Gareth Edwards. But, that's an age thing, I think. I love Gareth Bale. I think he's amazing. But, I grew up watching the Welsh team playing Gareth Edwards, and he was a huge hero of mine as a child. I absolutely looked up to him. And first time I ever met him, he came up to me, honestly, and he said, "Oh, hi, Tanni, my name's Gareth Edwards. I used to play rugby." And I just went, oh, and I don't know, I said something really stupid to him, and then just went, "I've got to go," and walked away, and then came back about 10 minutes later and said, "Really sorry, because you spoke to me." And so I still get a little bit like that. But yeah, I think, they both show the best of Welsh sport, that you can be really good at what you do, but very humble and just kind of quite normal in real life. So yeah, sorry, Gareth Bale, but it's Gareth Edwards.
Fantastic, thank you very much.
Thanks, Owen. Tanni, thank you so much. I've got 2 more questions before you go. Obviously, we're in a challenging times at the moment. We've been going through over 12 weeks now, and talking about things about people with anxiety, struggling at home, being shielded, getting letters that are saying that possibly they might be shielded after doing longer. What would your message be to? I mean, thinking about the NHS as well, the key workers are doing a fantastic job. What would your message be to everybody at the moment in regards to supporting that motivation and inspiration to continue and get through this?
Nobody has ever experienced anything like this before, and it's one of those things, if we knew then what we know now, things might be a little different. I think it's affecting everybody in such different ways. I mean, for me, this is the longest I've been home in 30 years. And actually 6 weeks in, it became that. So for me, not traveling, and I'm normally traveling 47 weeks a year, there's been some amazing things about being home. But working from home has been really difficult. And I do love it when we're on, whatever platform calls, and, kids are there and dogs are there and cats, and, and people apologise, go, "Do you know what? There is no need to apologise, this is just sort of working life." I think for me, what I found is that my capacity, because I'm not travelling, I can do loads more work than not, and I'm a bit of a workaholic anyway. And I'm sort of already thinking now, when we come out of lockdown, I can't keep up this capacity about how much work I'm doing. So I think everyone has good and bad days. For me, the thing that's kept me going through it is being physically active. And, I don't go in a racing chair anymore because that's just miserable and hard. But, I do a lot of different band work and medicine ball work. And, I get out, I've got a hand bike, and I get out and I push my day chair. And for me, that physical activity really helps. It does make me feel better. And I think the hard bit is now, it feels like we might be coming to the end, but I don't think, people still need to be really, really sensible about what they do, because actually that's our best chance of getting out of it in one piece. I think the message is don't catch it, because if you catch it, it's not a good place to be, really not. So I'm just being really sensible, trying to balance my work life, trying to spend time with my family, and just be physically active, because that's what works for me.
Okay, and finally, our last question is: if you could think of a quote to support motivation and inspiration, what would that quote be and why?
Well, anytime I'm asked about a quote, so my granddad had a saying, which was "aim high, even if you hit a cabbage," and I've no idea what it really means, really. And it doesn't lose anything, because my grandfather's Welsh speaking. It was basically cabbage in there, because people go, "Oh, it's probably lost in translation." No, it's not. It's a cabbage. And there's loads of other versions around. It's about having a goal and a dream, and seeing what you can achieve and pushing your boundaries. And I've kind of made it to be what I want it to be. But for me, just the 2 words, aim high. I write it in the front. I still have a paper diary as well as electronic, but I love paper diaries. I still write it at the front of all my paper diaries, just because there are times that things get really hard, and they might not seem hard to other people, but they might be hard to you, and vice versa. So, for me, it's always about finding ways to get through things. I think some of the things that being in sport teaches you is to find solutions, and it might not be the solution you want, it might not be the way you want to do it, but it teaches you to keep stepping back and looking for different ways to do things. So yeah, for me, aim high is something that's really important. And aim high hasn't got to be, you know, like global world stage. You know, aim high can be getting out of bed in the morning or doing a 5k run, or it can be, it's the high bit is what's high to you, not what's high to other people.
Baroness Tanni Grey-Thompson, it's a pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much. Thank you to everybody. I will send you the interview. If you're happy to share it, please let me know. And an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for doing our motivation inspirational project. Thank
Brilliant.
you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Stay safe. Bye bye. Bye bye, everybody.
Bye.
Yeah. Bye.